Welcome to episode 49 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is my fellow analyst, Anshel Sag. So let's get started with my first topic. So this week, Dish and AWS announced a partnership where Amazon is going to help Dish deploy their 5G RAN and core infrastructure on a public cloud-based platform. Is it a winning strategy? From my perspective, it is. So we've talked about greenfield deployments with 5G with Reliance and in India, Rakuten in Japan, and certainly Dish in the U.S. And I think it's actually exciting because it's the first deployment, within a public cloud infrastructure. And it should promise to bring operational and capital expenditure savings. What's your take, Anshel?
I think it's a good fit. I think Amazon's in a really good place right now, especially AWS, when it comes to the size of their cloud infrastructure. I think they're probably the best choice right now as far as somebody wanting to go out and roll out a new 5G network.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good fit. And I think it's going to be pretty good for a lot of companies that want to experiment with 5G and potentially grow with a new network operator like a Dish. So we'll see what ends up happening there, but I'm pretty optimistic considering that they chose Amazon for this.
Yeah, and from my perspective, when you look at the big public cloud providers, certainly Google has a telco, focus and organization. I think they're probably in the third position. Azure, with Microsoft, they've made some key acquisitions to bring them up to the foray. But certainly, I think Dish picking Amazon was a safe bet, given that they're definitely in the pole position with respect to telco cloud and what they're doing with Outpost and Wavelength, sort of supercharging the whole 5G, deployment experience. So I agree with you. Like, it'll be interesting to sort of watch this. And it could be, a great catalyst for other, operators like Verizon to embrace, cloud infrastructure and Open RAN to reduce some of their capital expenditures. I know you're going to speak about some updates with Verizon later in the podcast, so I won't steal your thunder there. But let's move to your first topic this week, and you want to talk about Verizon. So that's a great segue.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of news when it comes to Verizon today, or this week in general. So one of the things was that they added more cities to their millimeter wave deployment. Mm-hmm. So they added New Orleans, Fresno, and Riverside, as well as San Antonio. That brings their 5G millimeter wave cities to 71. In addition to that, they've also had a new promotional offer that will offer people $500 to leave their existing broadband provider and throw in a Samsung Chromebook 4 in along with the offer,
Mm-hmm.
Which I think sounds very much like a educational play for people who have kids who are still, going to school from
Sure.
home or doing, these hybrid approaches now that a lot of kids are going back to school. So that is in addition to the fact that Verizon also tapped Samsung and Ericsson for their mid-band C-band deployment. So that is a big one because they're tapping two of the leaders in the space for their infrastructure. And the thing is that when you look at Samsung's massive MIMO radios and what Ericsson comes to offer, it's going to be a very interesting rollout. That said, the spectrum won't be free till December, so they have some time to build this up.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that they're going to hit the ground running in December, and they're claiming that they're going to have 100 million pops by the end of March. So they're basically giving themselves a quarter to do that. But I have a feeling that most of that momentum will start in December and just keep rolling through March. In addition to all that news, Verizon also reported earnings. And what's interesting about their earnings was they actually showed revenue growth, but they lost wireless customers.
Okay.
Which didn't necessarily look great because they lost 178,000, while some other operators who we'll be talking about
Yep.
next gained some. So it's definitely a transformative time for Verizon as a company,
Yeah.
but they are definitely going to have to commit some serious resources and capital, which we've talked in previous top podcasts about, that they're going to need to do to get the C-band band deployed.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like Verizon has been on their heels recently, sort of being very, reactive with respect to, C-band and that sort of thing. And that's a great segue to my second topic this week, and it's AT&T earnings. And so AT&T did report positive subscriber additions, as well as a 5% revenue increase, which I find is it's actually quite amazing as folks exit sort of the pandemic. We begin to put that in the rearview mirror, hopefully. And but what I'm most impressed with is the cash balance that AT&T has on their balance sheet. And it's in the multi-billions, I think $9-10 billion in cash. And that's going to be really important to make needed investments, be very surgical with those investments, but make the needed investments for them to not only densify their network, but also, they purchased considerable C-band assets in the last auction as well. And so I think they're very well positioned. I think Warner Media continues to be a key differentiator for them. They're bringing original content, whereas, like T-Mobile and Verizon, they're sort of repackaging, different things for their consumer, services to get there. So I would like to see AT&T lean more into Warner Media. I think, beyond just offering HBO Max, as no additional charge, if you are an AT&T mobile subscriber, I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to sort of, grow that footprint. What do you think?
I think AT&T is definitely showing that they are refocusing a bit more on the network, and making more investments on that side. What's interesting is I do think that AT&T still has a considerable amount of debt, through their series of acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a feeling that that $8 billion or $9 billion is mostly from their direct TV transaction.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, I do think that AT&T and Verizon both have considerable debts to deal with, and I worry about what that might mean for consumers
Mm-hmm.
as they start to try to figure out ways to pay for a lot of the spectrum that they bought, and these different media organizations that they've also purchased over the last few years. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But I do think that both AT&T and Verizon are also poised to take advantage of the breadth of 5G and all the business opportunities as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Verizon and AT&T both have very strong focuses on business, and that's an area where T-Mobile is trying to rebuild itself, with the Sprint acquisition. So, and from my perspective, I've commented on this point on Forbes articles that I've posted. From my perspective, 90+% of the revenue opportunity, I believe, the monetization opportunity for operators for 5G will be in the enterprise space with Industry 4.0 and other applications. And so they are both very well positioned. But to your point, they've taken credit facilities out. They do have debt. Most big companies do. They do that judiciously. But I do like their cash position. And I think, with their Warner Media assets, they're very, very well positioned in the consumer space as well. So we'll keep our eye on that. But let me move to or actually your second topic this week. And you want to talk about China and base station counts.
Yeah, so this has been a constant um, geopolitical measure of China's dominance in 5G, or or their own race with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What I find interesting is they are now claiming that they've deployed 792,000 5G base stations, which are not 792,000 cell sites, because you can have multiple base stations per cell site, especially
Sure.
when you're looking at different carriers and such. So That is a number that was actually reported by the Chinese Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, which has been reporting a lot of these Chinese industry 5G numbers. And I think 5G is being used within China for political reasons as well.
For
So
sure.
I don't think
Yeah.
it's just the U.S. is doing it. But they did say that in addition to these base stations, the country expects that China 5G mobile shipments in China would account for 80% of all of the shipments in the second half of the year. So they're
Mhm.
expecting that the vast majority of phones shipping in the second half of the year are going to be 5G phones.
Mhm.
So I think that China is making a very rapid adjustment towards 5G. And I have a feeling that with the exception of the very bottom of the market, it's all going to be 5G, which makes sense for a lot of reasons because as you have more 5G devices on the network, you have better network utilization and more spectral efficiency.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And and I also agree with your statement that it's probably, a political, statement on their part. There's been this race to 5G. You and I have talked about it quite frequently. I think both you and I have actually, posted, contributions on various, sites as well, including Forbes, to that point. But where the rubber meets the road, really, it's not about access. It's about service delivery and digital transformation and that sort of thing. So time will tell if China's perceived leadership with respect to deploying RAN gives it an advantage. So, but in the U.S., Open RAN hopes to sort of close that very rapidly. So we continue to keep our eyes on that. And so let me go to my third and final topic this week. And I read the news that Governor Cuomo in New York helped pass legislation to basically mandate a very low cost, internet broadband subscription price for consumers that, he and they deem as, impoverished or underserved. I think, the guideline was $15 per month. I think there was some discussion around the fact that they feel the state of New York feels like broadband is expensive relative to what others pay in other parts of the world. This is a slippery slope from my perspective because what I don't think government entities understand is the amount of investment that the Comcast and the pure play cable providers of the world invest in mobile broadband infrastructure or fixed broadband infrastructure. And then when you look at recent announcements from AT&T and T-Mobile with their 5G fixed wireless access, it sort of makes me wonder. It's like you've got AT&T investing $2 billion to bridge the digital divide, provide very affordable services for subscribers. You've got T-Mobile. We've talked about them on prior podcasts about their hometown heroes and their hometown experts program where they're extending that infrastructure, they're making incremental investments, and actually T-Mobile claims initially with their 5G fixed wireless access service that they're going to cover 30 million subscribers in the U.S., 10 million of which are in sort of underserved areas. So I don't know if it's accurate to make a link between underserved areas and people that don't make a lot of money.
Mhm.
But my concern is when the government starts getting involved in setting pricing, that frightens me. What are your thoughts?
I think this is a well-intentioned effort.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that if we were to do something like this, it should probably be done on a national scale, kind of like the Lifeline program that AT&T has.
Or like a
Uh,
fund, or funds created, right?
so yeah, so there's like the Lifeline program, which I believe was actually mandated by the government and
Mm-hmm.
basically affords for discounted phone service so that everybody who needs to have access to critical services over the phone can
Right.
access it for $5 a month or $9 a month.
And that was the Obama administration, right? I mean, I don't want to I don't want to be negative about it, but they call it the Obama phone, right? I believe, if I'm not
That's
mistaken.
for cellular, but this is
Okay.
Lifeline is a wired connection.
Got it.
That is a separate, this predates the Obama administration, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
But basically it allows for at least a discount of $5 to $10. So $5 on a phone bill, $10 on an internet bill.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes internet much more accessible in terms of pricing. But I think that the problem is that there isn't a cap on what the top end cost can be. So $10 off of $50 a month is still not great for somebody who's living on the poverty line. So I think that there should be a base level of service that all operators offer. And I would be okay with them capping it at 10 megabits per second and, creating a base level of service, because let's be honest, nowadays people spend way more time using data than they do the phone. And, people are paying their bills, people are doing a lot of things online. And with the pandemic, you want to make sure that people always have internet access and can have reliable internet access at a very low cost. So I think we need to shift a lot of the subsidies that we've previously had for landlines and phone and move it towards data plans and service like that.
I agree, and I'm actually writing a book called The Human Network, and I've talked about this on social media, and I think I wrote a Forbes article late last year with an update. Internet should be, it should be a right, that everyone has access to. And, and if your income, prevents you from being able to have, connectivity, there should be methods and, and programs put in place to try to bridge that, that issue. But I just again, my concern is when a government entity sort of gets involved and starts doing things like setting pricing, they're not understanding the overall investments that cable operators and mobile operators are making, in kind of the larger, sort of scenario. So focusing on, I think AT&T came out in support of if you're going to go do this, establish a general fund, right? That, that's a little more equitable, and it's not as, sort of prescriptive. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how things unfold, and, we'll keep our eyes on that. But let's move to your third and final topic this week. And on a prior podcast, we talked about the proposed Biden administration multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package and how broadband is a part of that. Now, that price tag was north of $100 billion. And now Republicans have proposed something a little less expensive, but will it still sort of bridge the gap? Is it more efficient? Would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, so my third topic basically is today the Republican, I believe, Senate members have proposed an alternate budget for infrastructure, reducing it from, I think, $2 trillion to $600 billion. And part of that reduction is reducing the $100 billion broadband initiative into a $65 billion broadband initiative. The issue is they're not really saying what needs to be cut. I actually looked into the document that was being referenced by Senate Republicans, and it's 2 pages. So there's no way. So they're just negotiating on the top line right now, just trying to get the number down. But what's interesting is, and this is probably one of my biggest pet peeves about the current situation with this negotiation, there are a lot of members of the Republican Party who did not see internet infrastructure or internet broadband as infrastructure, and they didn't want it part of the infrastructure deal. And now all of a sudden there's 5 or 6 Republicans that are about it. So I want to make sure that, people understand that internet is infrastructure, and in many cases it's a utility. And we've had this discussion before with the FCC and whether or not the internet is a utility or should it be treated as one, and how do we classify it and such. But it's infrastructure, and if it weren't for the internet and the reliability of our internet, we would not have survived this pandemic. So I think it's good that Republicans haven't really been too aggressive on trimming the fund from $100 billion down to 65, but I'd like to see what they're trimming, because they're not really giving us much detail. It's a 2-page document at this point, and I'd like to see more details. But the fact that it's stayed inside of this infrastructure bill, I think is an important point.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think, when you look at, like the recent announcement by T-Mobile with their 5G fixed wireless access, I think, and then you look at like, Open RAN and Open RAN's capability to lower CapEx, lower OpEx for operators. I think that there's an intelligent way to go about it. I agree with you. Not a lot of detail behind sort of the initial, sort of proxy, but it's politics, right? And if witnessed, looking back at the Facebook hearings and those sort of things, sometimes it's important to educate our lawmakers in Washington, because some of them don't even know what the internet's all about, right? So I won't call anyone out in particular, but I think, what the nice thing about 5G, the fact that it's highly virtualized, the fact that, you've got Verizon and you've got T-Mobile and AT&T, all, that are going to provide long-term fixed wireless access services. That doesn't require necessarily a ton of fiber. Although, when you talk to Verizon, they and AT&T, they speak to like their investment in fiber is the backbone for all of that. But certainly for last mile, fixed wireless access can provide that capability quite cost effectively. Certainly in urban areas, where you have higher subscriber densities. But I believe, like, and we've talked about this on prior podcasts, the federal government, they're putting a lot of, subsidies in place to incentivize operators to sort of build out these networks in rural areas. And I was pleased to see, AT&T and T-Mobile step up recently to actually add incremental investment into that effort. So, I think, long term we'll get there. It's not a simple solution. I think what government entities don't understand is like just the billions of dollars that, operators and cable providers, invest in broadband infrastructure. So, but I'm confident, with 5G that, we'll be able to bridge the gap there. So, but Anshel, another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to reach out to us and provide insight on a specific topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Whaletown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.